Small Diamond Chapter. Arrival in Paris 1859, etc. In the spring of 1859, a 19-year-old Claude Monet boarded a train leaving Le Havre, the coastal town in Normandy where he was born and raised. The wind of the Atlantic still clung to his coat, and the sea, which had taught him to see light differently, remained etched in his mind. But now he was heading inland, towards Paris, a city on fire with change. It was not an easy decision. Le Havre had given him comfort, identity, and early success. By the age of 16, Monet had already sold caricatures of local figures, attracting the attention of the art world in Normandy. But even then, the sea, the skies, the shifting light of the coast had begun to stir something deeper in him. A desire not just to represent, but to interpret. And so he left, not for fame, not for glory, but for truth. When Claude Monet arrived in Paris, the city was on the cusp of a transformation. Baron Haussmann had just begun his massive urban reconstruction under Napoleon III. The narrow medieval alleys were being replaced by grand boulevards. Gas lamps began to light the night streets. Buildings rose with symmetrical stone facades, and cafes flourished on wide sidewalks. But for artists, the change wasn't just architectural, it was ideological. The old order, represented by the École des Beaux-Arts and the rigid hierarchy of the Académie des Beaux-Arts, was being challenged. New voices were whispering, some louder than others, that art needed to evolve. Monet was stepping into a storm of ideas. Yet Monet was not immediately a revolutionary. He came to Paris as a student, not as a rebel. He enrolled at the Académie Suisse, an independent, unstructured art school located near the Ile de la Cité, which welcomed those who did not fit into the mold of the official academies. Here, he met fellow students, many of whom would later become the key figures of Impressionism: Camille Pissarro, Edouard Manet, and later, Pierre-Auguste Renoir and Alfred Sisley. These young men bonded over their dissatisfaction with the constraints of classical painting. They painted not what was expected, but what they saw, what they felt, but it was not easy. Monet was poor. He lived in a modest rented room, sometimes going hungry. Paint was expensive. Canvas was a luxury. He wrote to friends about his frustration with the art establishment. He visited the Louvre, not to admire, but to question. He once wrote, "Greater than many copy the old masters. I prefer to go out into the open air and paint from nature." At a time when most painters worked from memory or models in studios, this was radical. Painting outside, directly observing light, clouds, motion, was still considered immature or even lazy. But Monet knew, truth was not in tradition. It was in light. He spent long hours along the banks of the Seine, capturing the way sunlight shimmered on water or how mist veiled the city skyline in the morning. Paris was not just a place, it was a light experiment. He wasn't alone. At cafes like Café Gerbois in the Batignolles district, he met other aspiring artists and thinkers. They debated fiercely: what is art? Should it teach? Should it moralize? Or should it simply reflect the world, honestly and beautifully? Monet did not shout in these debates. He painted. In 1859, he also attempted to submit works to the Salon de Paris, the official art exhibition of the Académie. But his style, already leaning toward fluid brushstrokes, lighter palettes, and looser forms, was rejected or criticized. Yet this only hardened his resolve. He became convinced that the academic system was blind to the evolving world. Paris had changed, but the Salon had not. By 1860, Monet decided to leave Paris for a time, to complete military service in Algeria. He would return again and again to the capital, but this first encounter with the city had planted a seed. He had found his artistic family. He had seen the boundaries that needed breaking. And when he returned for good, he would bring a revolution in paint.